The Tale of Genji was created roughly 1,000 years ago. At that time, the main city in Japan was the Heian Capital, which is why we refer to the era as the Heian period. The majority of the narrative is set in the Heian Capital, with realistic descriptions of the palace and the residences of former emperors and other places. In this unit, we will consider the blurred lines between history and fiction as we get a sense of how the Heian Capital was laid out. The capital was located in the same place as present-day Kyoto. Looking at the map, we can see that the Kamo River to the east and the Katsura River to the west come together to form a letter Y. The rectangle between the branches of the Y was the main area of the Heian Capital. Its layout was based on that of Chang'an, the capital of the Tang Dynasty in China. North to south, it measured 5.32 kilometers. East to west, 4.57 kilometers. At the north end of the capital was a large area known as the Greater Palace, which contained both the offices of the central government and the inner palace where the emperor lived. Stretching south from the Greater Palace to the center of the capital was the broad thoroughfare Suzaku Avenue. Suzaku Avenue divided the Heian Capital into the left capital to the east and the right capital to the west, where left and right were determined by facing south from the entrance of the Greater Palace. Both the left capital and right capital districts were arranged in neat grids of vertical and horizontal streets. The northernmost east-west artery was Ichijo, First Avenue, and southernmost was Kujo, Ninth Avenue. Between the two ran the other major east-west boulevards, Nijo, Sanjo, Shijo, and so on, Second Avenue, Third Avenue, Fourth Avenue, respectively. Even today, the city is still laid out along the same grid with the same street names like Sanjo and Shijo still in use. Along Suzaku Avenue, the vertical axis of the grid, both the left capital and right capital, were divided into 4 north-south columnar zones known as bo. So each side of Suzaku Avenue had Ichibo, Nibo, Sanbo, and Shibo. The avenues Oji, running north-south and east-west, were 24 meters wide or more, except for Suzaku Avenue, which may have been as broad as 85 meters across. In contrast, the smaller streets, Koji, were about 12 meters wide. Confusingly, the square areas between the north-south and east-west avenues were also known as bo, which was a separate bo from the north-south columnar zones of Ichibo, Nibo, etc. Each of these square areas bo was further divided by 3 north-south streets and 3 east-west streets, resulting in a smaller grid of 16 blocks. Each of these small blocks was known as a cho. The cho were roughly 120 meters square. The estate of a Heian nobleman with some political clout who served, for example, as a minister, was typically the size of 1 cho. Finally, we should note that in practice, the grid was not consistent throughout, and the right capital on the west side of the capital had many undeveloped sections due to marshland and slopes that made river management difficult. So the emperor lived in the inner palace within the greater palace precincts. But where did retired emperors live? Their residences were called Sento imperial palaces, roughly hermitage palaces, or goin, retirement palaces. There were a number of these throughout history. In the Heian period, for example, well-known Sento imperial palaces included Suzaku Palace, Suzaku-in, and Reizei Palace, Reizei-in. As you can see on the map, Suzaku Palace is located along Suzaku Avenue. The retired emperor who lived in Suzaku Palace is referred to in historical documents by the same name, Suzaku-in. This may seem a bit confusing, but it's actually a common convention in Japanese for referring to people. In many cases, when talking about a person, rather than using their actual name, it was common to call them by the name of the place where they lived. And this practice continues in some forms until today. Avoiding calling someone by their actual name is a way to show deference and respect. That being the case, Suzaku-in can refer to both the place and the retired emperor who lived there. The spacious estate called Suzaku Palace became the residence of the 59th emperor, Emperor Uda, in 897, on the occasion of his retirement and passing authority to his son. Because he lived in Suzaku Palace, Suzaku-in, from that point onward, he is sometimes referred to in historical records from the Heian period as retired Emperor Suzaku, Suzaku-in. Then, in 946, Emperor Uda's grandson, known as Emperor Suzaku, the 61st emperor, retired and took up residence at Suzaku Palace, after which point he too was known as Suzaku-in. Confusing matters for us even further, within the text of the Tale of Genji, we meet Genji's older half-brother, a man known as Suzaku. Why was he called this? Because when this character retired from being the emperor, he took up residence at Suzaku Palace. What about where Genji lived? When he was young, he lived in the estate at Nijo. There are multiple theories as to where exactly this might have been located, but the most convincing theory suggests it was at this location, along Nijo. This was property he inherited from his mother, the Kiritsubo intimate. Then, close to the end of Chapter 21, The Maidens, construction is completed for turning 4 cho into the Rokujo estate, and Genji moves into this expansive residence with his women and retinue. Genji's Rokujo estate is supposedly modeled after Kawara no In, the riverside estate of the 9th century figure Minamoto no Toru, located around here. A portion of the former site of Kawara no In was repurposed during the Edo period into the Shosei-en Garden, located a 10-minute walk from present-day JR Kyoto Station. If you ever visit Kyoto, why not go have a look?